The AI numbers have become white noise at this point. Another week, another announcement about hundreds of billions being dumped into data centers. You see the headline, think, that's wild, and immediately scroll to a recipe video. The figures are so astronomical, they've lost all meaning. But here's one worth actually absorbing. This year, Big Tech is burning through north of $700 billion on A1 infrastructure. That represents about 2.5% of America's entire economic output. Jensen Huang from NVIDIA isn't being dramatic when he calls this the most massive infrastructure project humanity has ever attempted. Yet somehow, nobody's bothering to ask the obvious follow-up question: where's all this money actually coming from? Let me give you a starting point. $1.65 trillion. That's the estimated hidden obligations of just 5 tech giants, debt that exists completely outside their official financial statements. For context, those same companies report around $1.35 trillion in regular debt. The invisible pile isn't just larger than what's visible, it's significantly larger. Meta's hidden obligations nearly triple what they publicly report. You don't move that kind of money into the shadows without a sophisticated system. And that system has a name, one that Wall Street's been desperately trying to scrub from memory for the past 15 years. Rewind to summer 2007 at the Federal Reserve's big annual gathering in Jackson Hole. An economist from PIMCO named Paul McCulley stands up with a warning. He's watching a parallel banking ecosystem flourish in the darkness. Institutions that function exactly like banks borrowing, lending, leveraging without actually being banks. Which means no deposit protection, no federal backstop, no banking regulations whatsoever. McCulley coined the term for it, the shadow banking system. His description? The whole alphabet soup of levered-up non-bank investment conduits, vehicles, and structures. If that sounds like gibberish, here's the translation. Imagine a company, let's call it Acme Corp. They need to borrow a fortune, but don't want that debt appearing on their financial statements. The workaround? Acme creates a separate entity called a special purpose vehicle. On paper, these are completely independent companies with separate names, accounts, and crucially, separate debts. The SPV takes on massive debt, uses that borrowed cash to purchase whatever assets Acme needs, then leases those assets back to Acme. The SPV holds both the debt and the asset ownership. The original company gets full use of everything without the debt appearing anywhere on their books. It's basically opening a credit card in your cousin's name, racking up charges, enjoying all the purchases, but technically having zero debt when someone asks about your finances. In 2007, this shadow system was built on mortgages. Today, data centers. The AI revolution is running on the exact same financial machinery that imploded the global economy in 2008. But the shadows aren't where this begins. They're the last resort when every other funding source runs dry. The AI build-out needs more capital than any single source can provide. So big tech started working through every available option, beginning with the most obvious, their own cash reserves. These companies look bulletproof on the surface. PIMCO notes that top-rated tech firms carry net debt at just 0.04 times earnings, the lowest ratio of any U.S. sector. The initial strategy was straightforward: let the cash printing business fund the expansion. Then the expansion started consuming everything. For most of the past decade, these companies reinvested about 40-50% of their cash flow back into capital expenditures. This year, PIMCO estimates that figure hits 94%. They're running the entire cash engine at maximum capacity just to finance A-wine infrastructure. The build-out isn't being funded by the vault anymore. It's draining it completely. When internal cash couldn't keep pace, they turned to bond markets at unprecedented scale. Between 2020 and 2024, the 5 biggest hyperscalers issued roughly $28 billion annually in bonds. In 2025 alone, that same group issued over $100 billion, 4 times their previous average. Then 2026 arrived. In just 5 months, they've already issued another $159 billion. 5 months of borrowing exceeded the entire previous 5 years combined. Tech now represents nearly 18% of all U.S. investment-grade debt. It's escalated so dramatically that the International Monetary Fund is raising red flags. Tobias Adrian, IMF senior official and former Federal Reserve vice president, put it plainly, what is quite worrisome from a financial stability perspective is that the major tech firms are starting to leverage up themselves. When U.S. markets became saturated with tech debt, they went global. Alphabet raised $32 billion across 4 currencies in under 24 hours, including a 100-year bond that was 10 times oversubscribed. Overnight, these companies became top issuers in currencies where they had zero presence a year earlier. A bond manager at With Bones explained why the US dollar market, the world's deepest capital market, simply cannot absorb what these companies need, which forced them elsewhere. And elsewhere is where this stops being normal, because there's a limit to how much debt you can carry on your official books. Which brings us back to special purpose vehicles and shadow banking. The key difference from 2008? This shadow system is hiding in plain sight. Everyone's missing it because it lives in the footnotes of public filings. And nobody reads footnotes except finance nerds. Well, and me. Rather than drowning you in names and numbers, let's examine one deal. The blueprint, the largest project financing ever completed as investment-grade bonds. $27 billion, all structured through a special purpose vehicle named after a New Orleans pastry, Beignet Investor. Beignet exists for one purpose, owning Hyperion, a multi-gigawatt data center campus in rural Louisiana. Meta announced it, designed it, built it, operates it, and is the sole tenant. But the $27 billion debt that built Hyperion, that belongs to the pastry. Here's the structure. Blue Owl Capital creates Beignet and takes 80% equity. Meta takes 20% and becomes the exclusive tenant. Beignet issues $27.3 billion in investment-grade bonds. Major money managers like BlackRock and PIMCO buy them. Beignet uses that cash to build Hyperion. Meta moves in and pays rent, which covers bondholders through 2049. So it's Meta's data center, Meta's equipment, Meta's engineers, but Meta legally owns just 20%, while Blue Owl owns 80%. Why? One phrase in accounting rules, at 20%, Meta isn't the primary beneficiary. And if you're not the primary beneficiary, that $27 billion doesn't appear on your balance sheet. It legally vanishes. But there's more buried in Meta's filings. Page 106 of their annual report contains one sentence: "We have provided residual value guarantees with an aggregate threshold of approximately $28 billion that decreases over time." Translation: Meta guarantees the building's value. If Meta walks away and Hyperion is worth less than the guaranteed floor, Meta covers the difference. If the campus drops to $20 billion against the $28 billion floor, Meta writes an $8 billion check to bondholders. So Meta tells Wall Street, we don't own it, didn't borrow the money, not our liability. But tells bondholders, don't worry if this loses value. We've got you covered for up to $28 billion. Same thing, 2 different stories. Then the cherry on top, Beignet's bonds run to 2049, but Meta's lease doesn't start until 2029 and renews in 4-year chunks. A 24-year loan resting on a 4-year lease. And this building is a hyper-customized supercomputing site built around Meta's proprietary hardware in rural Louisiana. If Meta walks, bondholders hold a very specific building for 2 decades. But Beignet wasn't a one-off. Last week, BlackRock started marketing Project Soapia, over $12 billion in bonds for Meta's newest 1 gigawatt AI data center in El Paso. Same structure, same 80-20 split, different pastry. 2 deals is just 2 deals. But estimates show off-book debt across 5 companies has grown roughly 8 times since 2022. Quinn Emanuel counted over $120 billion moved off balance sheets in under 2 years. Moody's found big tech pledged nearly $1 trillion for future AI data center leases, with over $660 billion completely invisible on their main balance sheets. Morgan Stanley estimates total off-balance sheet exposure at roughly $1.8 trillion. And here's the systemic problem. It's the same small club of lenders on every deal. When 5 borrowers use one structure funded by one handful of lenders, risk stops being diversifiable. It's the same bet written 5 times. The last 2 times a financing structure standardized this quickly across an entire industry, telecom vendor financing and mortgage securitization. A Quinn Emanuel lawyer who spent years on post-2008 litigation described watching this unfold with 2 words: déjà vu. So there's your answer. The largest infrastructure build-out in history is being financed first with cash until it consumed 94 cents of every dollar, then with bonds until Earth's deepest capital market couldn't absorb them, and now in footnotes where hidden debt has quietly exceeded public totals. Where does this leave us? Honestly, after weeks inside these filings, I have no idea how this ends. But I know what has to go right. Because this isn't an investment anymore, it's history's largest bet, and it has 4 legs. First, revenue must multiply against $110 billion annual AY revenue versus $700+ billion spending. Second, returns must stop shrinking from 40% toward 10%. Third, the borrowing window must stay open for the $1.5 trillion funding gap through 2028. Fourth, the grid must absorb it all while the largest U.S. power market sits pinned at its price cap. None of this is secret. It's hiding in public filings, auction records, analyst reports, the stuff nobody reads except nerds in Patagonia vests. That's what this channel is. I do the reading. You get what matters. Because when you step back and look at everything that must go right, this stops looking like an emerging technology investment and starts looking like a parlay, 4 legs stacked on top of each other, where every single one has to hit for this to pay off.